Welcome to Riks Europe, to our weekly roundup of important political news. Of course, this week it's not difficult to see what's important in Europe. The announcement of President Trump and his defense secretary that they will make major concessions to Russia by allowing Russia to keep at least part of the territory it has conquered, stolen from Ukraine, and by announcing that Ukraine will never become a member of NATO, which is actually quite a change for the United States, because in the past it was the US that was trying to push Europe into accepting Ukraine as a NATO member state. So welcome, Elias.
Thank you, Peter.
So yeah, what's your thinking about this?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that he didn't deliver this in 100 days, in his first 100 days in office, as he said he would. Well, actually, I think he even said he would end this war before he even entered office. Obviously, that did not happen. This was more complicated than he anticipated, I suppose. But I think that the American solution as it stands right now is actually a pretty realistic one. I mean, we're actually in Europe. I think that the most belligerent parties are the parties that are essentially losing power across the continent right now in various elections. I mean, the populist right is on the rise, and many of these parties, especially in Central Europe and also in countries such as France, they don't really have the same type of commitment to the Ukraine conflict that many of the liberals, for example, may have. And I think that Europe has for a very long time been bogging itself down in a very unrealistic vision of the outcome of this war, actually, that, actually, Ukraine is supposed to be able to keep all of these territories that they couldn't defend from Russia, and we're supposed to be, what exactly, attacking Russia and taking back these territories? That's just not going to happen. And they've been bogged down in this war of attrition, which has been hurting Europe for quite some time now, and it's been taking a huge toll on the standards of living, not the least in Germany, of course, which was very energy dependent on Russia previously. So I think that the cost that they set themselves up to when the current Russian invasion of Ukraine began in 2022 is that it wasn't realistic whatsoever. And now Europe is probably going to be paying the price, because this is a major prestige loss for them, actually, that Donald Trump is just barging in and saying that actually we're just going to do this sort of middle of the road solution to this, where Russia can keep these territories and the US is going to do a number of concessions to make sure that peace is at least somewhat stable. And what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mostly agree with what you're saying, and I mean, like you said, it was a loss of prestige for Europe, but then is it really? Because what prestige have they lost? Well, now they all pretend to be surprised that the United States and Trump don't really care about what they think. But for decades, European governments have been neglecting their defense. I mean, there are some differences. Finland has been more responsible. Poland, of course, has been very responsible. The UK and France, to a degree, have kept their military capacity. But if you look at countries like the Benelux, Sweden, Denmark, and especially Germany, they have been completely neglecting their defense. Germany was spending 3 or 4% to defense in the 1960s. On top of that, Germany has been neglecting its energy production capacity. You know, it's one thing to import and trade from Russia. Okay, there's arguments in favor or against. We're doing trade with a lot of criminal regimes. But I mean, it's another to sort of deliberately undermine your own energy production capacity, phase out fossil fuels, and then become dependent on regimes like Russia. I mean, that is just unforgivable. So I don't think they had a lot of prestige in the first place. They deserve the humiliation. Now, when you look at the actual deal, I don't think there's big surprises there, right? I think few people expected Ukraine to gain back all of its territory. I mean, Ukraine becoming a member of NATO was always at least a very long-term, distant prospect. Ukraine is a very corrupt country. It's clearly not a good idea to have a mutual defense pact with a very corrupt country. That said, maybe something good can come from this. We can still unilaterally provide defense equipment and instruments to Ukraine. So far, I think that's been a good thing. We have not ended in a war with Russia, and we have been able to help the Ukrainians to defend themselves. So that's been successful, to be fair. The sanctions have been a complete failure. This has been not a great help, or this has been not any help to Ukraine. And the proponent says, oh, you just have to wait a little bit longer and then they will work. Or we have to do it just a bit differently. And then somehow, supposedly, Russia will not find all these loopholes. And they completely ignore the whole history of sanctions worldwide, how sanctions have failed. So I mean, like one argument I can think of in favor of the critics of Trump now is, look, maybe he's going a bit too quick. Maybe that's true, right? We'll have to see. I mean, also you could say, I think that's the secret stance of, for example, the Finnish and the Polish governments. They assume there's going to be a war with Russia anyway. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. So they're like, okay, now we have the Ukrainians that are willing to fight, weakening Russia today. Why don't we just try to, at least help them in that and not encourage them to stop this war? And I mean, for me, that's not a crazy reasoning, but it's unethical because, I mean, if you look into the details of this war, it's horrendous. And any humane approach should be to try to stop it. And I definitely think we should take the threat of Russia serious. It may be true that they want to triple their army, etc. But then for me, the response to that is to become, so strong militarily, to be armed to the teeth that Russia doesn't even think of going there. I think that's the more sustainable approach, and not to try to fuel some horrendous war in the hopes that this will then ultimately continue to weaken Russia. I mean, I don't think that's the right approach.
No, I agree with especially the humanitarian perspective on this is actually Ukraine has been just absolutely ravaged economically and not the least demographically by this war, with a number of people who are fleeing the country, intending to never return, by the way, and just the destroyed infrastructure and all of these terrors that is put upon the population. Not also the fear of being conscripted, which is of course the Ukrainian government taking a toll on its own population. And in that sense, it just makes sense from a humanitarian and long-term perspective to end the immediate hostilities as soon as humanly possible. And this also even goes for Russia, if I'm to be bold as to say that actually Europe is not benefiting long-term from a Russia that is completely just destroyed by having a war economy and just having these hostile attitudes just be inherent for a very long time towards the rest of Europe. I think that's just going to harm whatever reparations that can be accomplished between Russia and the rest of Europe in the future. I think that finding a peaceful solution right now is probably most potent from. It's probably the best solution for ensuring peace, actually, that will last in the future.
Yeah, I agree. If I can just add to that, I've been. Once I had the opportunity to speak to Richard Rahn, who's an American economist who had the pleasure to have worked both in the White House and in the Kremlin. So he was an advisor to Bush Sr., but then shortly after that he became an advisor to a libertarianish Russian Prime Minister, Gaidar. So for 2 months or so, he had a small office in the Kremlin, and he told me that back then, the United States was sending planes with U.S. dollars to Moscow, so the government was able to continue to pay the police and the security and the army forces, because they understood that Russia breaking down is not in anybody's interest. And I do think that this is also something that some of the people that want to weaken Russia, etc., should understand, that, what kind of a sustainable long-term approach is this? In the best case scenario for them, the Putin regime collapses, but let's not forget they have nuclear nuclear bombs. I mean, a realistic approach strikes me as much more sensible. In any case, it's a good idea for us to take our defense serious. And I think if we want to prevent war with Russia, which is absolutely what we should do, obviously, the solution is here at home, is investing in defense and not wasting taxpayers' money to all kinds of social programs in order to gain votes, because that's really what Western Europe has been doing in the last 30 years.
I agree.
Well, good. And let's move maybe to the second topic. Again, Trump, he's omnipresent. It's very difficult to keep track of his adventures. But the second topic is potentially even more important for Europe than the first one, which is the announcement of Trump to impose tariffs. It's the big day. He said he's going to impose tariffs on steel and aluminium, and he's going to come up with what he calls reciprocal tariffs. And I mean, can you blame him? If you look in the statistics, on average, EU tariffs are slightly higher than American tariffs. I mean, both are very protectionist, right? To be clear, not very orthodox. But also, when you look at specific sectors like agriculture, the European Union is a lot more protectionist towards agriculture from America than the other way around. So surely the EU could make a move here, show some goodwill and ultimately benefiting European consumers. But yeah, that doesn't seem to be the strategy. The EU is trying to copy what it has done in 2018, what has failed, which is to impose targeted tariffs on products from specific American Republican states, tariffs on Harley Davidson, tariffs on orange juice from Florida, that kind of stuff. Not sure. I mean, it didn't work last time around. Why do they think it will work now?
It's pretty interesting that the EU is targeting goods specifically that they associate with, Republican voting Americans, from, goods from red states in particular. It sort of goes against the whole principle of, being sort of even-handed and having this sort of equal opportunity that, trade is supposed to be characterized. The free trade is supposed to be characterized by the sort of equal opportunity in that sense. And they're specifically targeting a particular segment of the American population and not another one. And obviously, they're trying to make sure that Democrats don't get punished by whatever the EU is trying to punish Trump's voters with. It sort of rubs me the wrong way, actually, that the EU, which is supposed to be even-handed, advertises itself as as a great sort of humanitarian and standing for the equality before the law, equality of opportunity, and all of these very fine-sounding liberal tenets, is actually acting this way. It's very striking, actually.
Yeah, and also I think the interesting thing is, as compared to 2018, is that the United Kingdom is not following the countermeasures that the EU will impose on Trump. Instead of targeting the Republican states, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, is trying to cozy up to Trump, to look for a more constructive approach. And personally, I think at least it may fail, to be fair, but at least that's what the EU should try. They should say, look, to be fair, yeah, you're kind of right that it's not always even, that we're actually a bit more protectionist than you are, and we're happy to partially solve that. I mean, and secondly, in recent years, the EU has come up with a whole range of extra protectionism, green protectionism, and this is, at the moment in American business circles, strongly contested. The EU has come up with a climate tariff. They say, look, jurisdictions and countries that do not follow our climate policies, that are suicidal, I mean, when they export to the EU, they should pay a tariff to compensate for that, to create a level playing field. I mean, this is crazy, right? This goes against the idea of free trade. So the EU is actually a lot more protectionist than Trump even. Also, it's not just this tariff. They come up with a whole range of regulations. The due diligence regulations that they're imposing on companies across the world, forcing companies to detail their supply chains to see that it's environmentally sustainable. Basically, a whole bunch of extra bureaucracy that is not exactly welcome and that is distorting trade flows. But also, it's a deforestation directive. The EU saying, look, we will try to fight deforestation. But by exporting a lot of bureaucracy to our trading partners. You can only import goods if you can prove that they are not undermining deforestation. And even the Biden administration was very angry about that, but also a country like Malaysia, they actually import a lot of palm oil into the West. But they have made a lot of progress in terms of deforestation. NGOs say that they have really reduced the deforestation problem in their palm oil trade. And they're like, yeah, I mean, this is very unfair. Now we have this MSPO standards, their own standards basically to fight this environmental problem, which have proven to be successful. But now the EU said, oh, no, we don't want to recognize that. Can you please just go with our own new, very unclear bureaucracy? The UK doesn't do that. The UK says, yeah, you're a trading partner. We are happy to recognize your standards. We don't want to, micromanage the whole world and dictate the whole world what kind of, environmental and social policies to follow. So all these protests led to the EU postponing this particular legislation for 1 year. But now it's also in the crosshairs of Trump, and one of the officials of the Trump administration has said, "Look, we will take action against this EU green regulation that is hurting American business." So it's not that these regulations are only hurting EU industry. They're disrupting trade flows, and in that sense, it's very protectionist. So all I'm saying is that the EU actually has a lot to offer to Trump. They could say, look, we've been wrong. We're happy to correct our mistakes and at least reserve all this crazy new bureaucracy only to European companies. And secondly, obviously, we will not continue with this crazy new climate tariff that is also angering India. And we will be happy to reduce our own protectionism, for example, on agricultural products. That would be win-win. And maybe in the end, Trump may come out of this as a great victor and a great champion of free trade.
Come to think of it, why do they call it protectionism when it isn't protecting domestic industries? It's actually only exporting all of these virtue signals, essentially, and that's what the EU has been doing. I don't really know if I want to call it what they've been doing protectionism, because in a traditional sense, protectionism is still a nation state trying to protect its own economic interests from the encroachment of foreign imports, but that's not really what the EU has been doing per se, because we've been deindustrializing. We've been losing out industry to China, for example, to various countries in the third world, and all of these benefits that are supposed to be coming from protectionism aren't actually seen here. What we're only seeing is this environmental virtue signaling, this is sort of moral high stand towards the rest of the world, which is it's kind of backwards and very bizarre.
Absolutely, and that brings us also to our third topic, which is exactly about virtue signaling, the sort of decline of what we could call wokeism across the world. Definitely the Trump election has played one role in it, but it's a lot more profound than that. We could see Google abandoning its automatic enshrining of holidays like Black History Month in its Google Calendar. In the UK, the government is scrapping legislation that would make it even easier to change your gender legally. So gender is supposed to be a separate concept from sex. Sex is a concept coming from science, whereby males have, I think, XY chromosomes, and ladies XX, but somehow that was no longer respected. So we got into all kinds of weird situations with that. And yeah, many companies and celebrities scrapping their pronouns. I saw in the United States an important Democratic politician, Mayor Pete, taking his pronouns from his bio on Twitter X. So yeah, what do you think, Elias? Are we moving back to normality, if I can use such an offensive term?
Well, at least temporarily. I don't think that many, for example, the Labour Party abolishing these plans to make gender reassignment, for example, much easier. That's just part of their nature, as part, they're radical revolutionaries in a lot of sense. These left-wing parties, these left-wing movements that have been dominating not just politics, but also just the private sector. Google, for example, all of these major tech companies. So what we're only seeing is, I think what we're seeing is only temporary, to an extent, at least. I mean, they're just adjusting to the fact that Donald Trump won, and the fact that they have to stay on good terms with him, and that probably means cutting down on all of these virtue signaling stuff that he has been actively targeting in the United States, at the very least. And of course, it's pretty plain to see that. Obviously, the United Kingdom would be the first to actually follow the line here compared to the rest of Europe. I mean, the Anglo-Saxon world is sort of changing, undergoing its own this anti-woke transformation quicker than the rest of Europe is, where it has also been introduced much slower, of course, than in the Anglo-Saxon world. So they've been sort of running at they've just met the end, I think, the end of the line of this insane ideology in the United States and in the United Kingdom and the rest of the Anglosphere. So it's just natural, I think, that it is on the decline right now, that people are trying to, they're taking away their pronouns. They're scaling back on some of these insane policies and all of this. However, I do think it's only temporary. We're probably going to see a rise of this again once Trump is out of office. Potentially another Democrat candidate will win, and that might, we might see the return of these types of policies again. As for the rest of Europe, we're lagging behind in that sense. We don't really see the need to adjust to Trump, to sort of appease Trump, that I think Keir Starmer is trying to do. Instead, we're doubling down because we think that doing the opposite of what Trump is doing is just ultimately good. That's what the mainstream political establishment does in Europe, at least.
Yeah, I agree, and let's hope that indeed this reaction against Trump is contained. That people are saying, look, we're not going to do that. This is all unscientific. It's tribal. I mean, J.K. Rowling has been a great champion for women's rights against the idea that a man can somehow, from now on, legally call him a lady and therefore get the right to go to the ladies' prison. That's one of the cases in the UK where then this male rapist turned female started raping females in the female prison. I mean, all of that happened as a result of this craziness, really. And for me, perhaps the worst of it all is their obsession with race. I mean, the message of Martin Luther King is that, look, it's not the color of your skin, but the content of your character that should matter, right? And we don't want to start categorizing people as, in all kinds of, tribal ways, and most certainly not on the basis of race, which has been for centuries a dividing thing between people, has caused so much misery. And it's just maybe not surprising, but terrible to see that the people that supposed to be the great anti-racist and had, to be fair, I think a valid cause to fight for against racism, that they actually turn in favor of it by embracing Black Lives Matters, stuff like that, and dividing up people into unscientific categories like race, because of course you cannot scientifically determine whether somebody is from one race or another. In apartheid South Africa, they tried to do that. They had the pencil test. If there was any doubt, which meant that people that were deemed not white, but it wasn't sure if they were colored or black, they had to have like a pencil in their hair, and if the pencil would stick, it would sort of scientifically prove that they would be one race or another. So I mean, that kind of race classification had been completely embraced by large parts of the left, and it's truly good riddance to see that weakening now. Yeah.
It was sort of approaching that level with the absurdity that woke politics was taking in the United Kingdom and the United States. So again, it's not a surprise that these are the two countries that we're seeing the serious political pushback against these forces now. We've yet to see this in Europe.
Okay. Happily waiting for it. So thank you very much, Elias. And
thank you, Peter.
Thank you to our viewers for watching Riks Europe.